Okay. Today I'm going to ask you to do something you've never done before in this session. I'm going to ask you to choose a book. I'm going to ask you to read it during this session. I'm going to ask you to talk about it afterwards. They were the words of a professor that we worked with in Ghana about 4 or 5 months ago to start off, to kick off our trials of something called an e-reader in places where things like books and paper don't get to. But I'm going to talk a little bit about books and about reading. I guess, you know, we've all read a book, yeah? Hands up those who have read the same book twice. Quite love you. Hands up those who have read the same book 3 times. Well, that's quite something. That says something. There's got to be something about books that are pretty engaging, are pretty passionate, are pretty emotive. Cognitively, to read a book, the average book is about 80 or 90,000 words, 240, 250,000 characters. Your brain has to put all of them, they're in a unique order, has to put them in an order so you can elicit sense from that. That's what literacy is about. That's why books are important. And the passion that we get from books is clearly evident in here today. We've got a phrase up there that says what we feel when we're reading what we consider to be a good book. As you get towards the end of the book, you get into the climax, you're feeling you're going to find out all, but there's a tinge of sadness. There's a tinge of sadness that it's almost like you're losing a friend. There's something that's been with you for a few days or a few weeks or a few months, and you're losing it. There's a real passion that I think most of us in this room know about books. Okay. There's a very bad photo from a number of years ago. And that's a building that I used to frequent quite a lot. It's my local library in Nottingham in England. And I used to go there with my father 2 or 3 times a week. He loved books. Now, it looks kind of like an austere and a pretty small building from outside. But for me, as a child, there was a whole world in there. It was enormous. And I used to go there, and I'd go to the adventure section, and my dad would just see me down there for 45 minutes, and I'd sit down and I'd immerse myself in what that section had. And then 3 or 4 days later, we'd go back, and I'd go to the sports section, or the history section, or the foreign travel section. The point was, for me, having access to such a wealth of books, I wanted to explore passions. Somebody couldn't tell me what I wanted to read. I had to make the choice for myself. So I'm going to give you in 30 seconds like a brief history of the book. 2500 BC, scrolls, papyrus. Coming through to the 1st century, the Chinese, in fact, invented paper. But it was the Europeans that developed it into what's called codex. Paper put together with a hard back. Moving up 1600 years, it evolved into the hardback. As we see, into the paperback in the 1930s. And now, in the last few years, there seems to be some sort of emergence of e-readers. Through all of these changes of form and changes of factor, there's been resistance. Especially in the 1930s, there was resistance, and commentators said, well, surely you can't be serious. You can't put actually something dignified and serious in a paperback. It has to come in a hardback. So there's always been resistance to change. So what I want to tell you a little bit about now is what we're doing in Africa. Now, I read an article about a week ago in the International Herald Tribune about e-readers. And it was kind of like pretty negative and medium about what e-readers would do. Yeah, they hold a lot of books, 1,500 books, connectivity, but so what? But it finished off with a phrase that said, how sad it would be to live in a world without paper books? Well, I wrote to that journalist. I haven't got a reply yet. There is a world, and a lot of this world does not have access to paper books. I'm going to show you a little bit about what we're doing in Ghana.
Good. So, are you guys tired of learning new things, or do you want to learn a little bit more? More? Yeah. Wow.
From the very day that they have this Kindle in their hand, you could see that they were motivated because it is very light, it is portable, it's easy to operate, and they find it very easy, and they are reading and they have delight in what they are doing.
When you come here and you share the Kindle files, when I went home, I gave it to my sister and we enjoy it. And we will read together. If you are going to sleep, we are reading again. And if you are tired, we put the Kindle down and sleep.
Okay, there's some of the girls that were on the trial. Naomi, Cecilia, Gladys. They're all orphans. Their parents died of AIDS. Many of them are HIV positive or with full-blown AIDS. Some of the boys in the class are ex-soldiers from Sierra Leone. They carry an immense burden with them. But what was evident to us and to many that have visited these regions is that the access to education, the access to new ideas is so important. And Cecilia, there on the left-hand side, confided in me that this was an enormous opportunity for them. The only hope that they have is an access to education. That's the only thing that can give them hope for the future. So let's talk about why paper doesn't get there. It's kind of like obvious, but there's like one big tanker. So books are heavy. You put books in a box, you've got 24 in a box, that's pretty heavy. You put that on a pallet, you put 36 books on a pallet, 20 pallets on a container, you ship it to port. It sits at the port for about 3 months. It goes on a ship. 20, 30 days later, it gets to the western port of Africa X. Again, it sits there for 3 months before it's taken, if you're lucky, to where you want it to go, 200-300 miles, 1,500 miles away from them. They're heavy and they're of low value. Logistically, it's just a nightmare. And then when it finally gets to a school, the professor will open a box and take out a book and go, wow, thanks very much. That's wonderful. But it's actually not the book we wanted. Far from it. It's not the book. It's the wrong edition. You don't have enough. How can you give me 3 or 4 books and I've got 20, 30, up to 70 in a class? Primarily, that's why books don't get to that part of the world. But I'm going to tell you, or share with you, what we feel it's the right time to bring e-readers to where paper doesn't get to. First reason is that mobile coverage in Africa is increasing enormously. It has 51% penetration. Why have I got a picture of a chief? Well, that's a story in 30 seconds. Well, as we entered the village, we had to look for permission to do the trials in the village. And we had to talk to the chief and the witch doctor. And we sat in a circle with some plastic chairs in the middle of a field, which was in the middle of a jungle, which was in the middle of a very, very rural part of Ghana. And then suddenly, in a very somber ceremony, the dulcet tones of Nokia were heard. And the chief looked around and looked for his mobile and pulled out his mobile and proceeded to speak. If we wanted evidence that mobile technology and connectivity is getting everywhere, it was there. Content. Well, we've all heard of what Google Books is doing, the Gutenberg project, books out of copyright. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is just the start. There is a lot of content that is free digitally. There's a lot of content that is very cheap digitally, and this is only going to increase. Publishers, are quite worried about it. They're going to have to revisit their business model, probably cut margins, but hey, now they've got potential global distribution. And the third point is, and this is very important, look at that slide. That picture was taken about 50 years ago in a classroom. It kind of looks like the classroom my kids study in. Around any classroom, there's a sort of ecosystem. There's a Ministry of Education, there's a district authority, there's a parent-teachers association, an examination board, a headmaster. There's a teacher there at the back of the room. They are all gatekeepers to those kids. So if you want to innovate, you don't need to, or it's kind of challenging, if you want to revolutionize their education system, that's a tough call because you've got a lot of gatekeepers to talk to. So where e-readers kind of work is that they come in a little bit under the radar. Books or technology that the teachers have been trained in. They know about books, they know how to use them with their kids. They don't have to be retrained in another technology. And so teachers are the first gatekeeper, the ones that will either leave your technology in the corner or they'll actually use it. And that's in fact what we're testing at the moment. So many say to us, okay, well, that's great, but why are you subsidizing the use of e-readers there? Why not just leave it to the market? Mobile phones have gone on a steep climb, a steep ascendancy. Well, the market doesn't always work. If you just Google markets 6th of October 2008, you'll find 60 billion reasons why markets don't always work. And markets fail where there's, number one, a monopoly, where there's, number two, asymmetry in the distribution of knowledge in a market, so somebody's got more knowledge than another. And thirdly, it's an area where there's, they call it externalities, economists, but it's about something like education, which is a social good. And for a company to come in and get a profit from education, it's kind of difficult because the real gains from investing in technology in year 1 come out in year 20, in year 30, in year 40. The market doesn't always function. So we've got an approach to development that at Worldreader that basically we see ourselves as a bridge between the developed world and the developing world. But what's more important about that is that a bridge goes both ways. This is just normal business practice. We're in sub-Saharan Africa not to push a technology. We're in sub-Saharan Africa to observe what's working, what's not, to diagnose what the real needs are. We can't diagnose what real needs are from afar. You wouldn't do that in a market here. So why would you do that in a developing world? That's really, really important to us. We're also diagnosing what price the price of the device has to fall to. It's kind of like still around, $170, $180, yeah? It's half of what it was 2 years ago, and we believe, and we're going to try and push it further. How can we push it? We can talk to manufacturers about the functionality that they need, not to put color necessarily, not to put touchscreen, or not to put interactivity on these, to put just enough so that they can read books and get that price down to a level where it's economically attractive for a Ministry of Education to buy them. In all of this, we've learned quite a lot as well. Instead of perhaps taking all of the free books, the Charles Dickens and the Shakespeares, and saying, okay, now we have a possibility to deliver these to you in the developing world. Well, that's kind of, feels a little bit like a bit of imperialism, yeah? But if you're giving this technology, you want to be able to open it up to local content, local authors. There's a latent demand for authors to get published. And of course now, the barriers to entry, the barriers to actually publish your book, you and I could, take the proceedings of TED today, sorry Alphonse, and we could publish them tomorrow. and probably sell them by the end of the day. I know it's not, we haven't got the rights, but it is so easy to publish. So in developing countries, this is a market that we want to open up, which is absolutely complementary to devices being out there, chicken and egg. And the benefits reach many. The benefits reach little Marcel down there in the pink shirt. When he was on his own, he was a little bit of a terror. He wasn't the target of the trial, but he wanted to look at the device, him and his friends. It was a test of ruggedness, if anything else. And basically, what we see there is that they have so much capacity to use devices that have screens and buttons. It's no, because they've already got mobile phones. So another device that's got buttons and screens is no big deal. And increasingly, the people involved in the test were there to share with the rest of the community what they were learning, the ideas they were learning, and where they got them from. Okay, so in closing, why don't we let, there's a thing over here about participation, really, and gaps. If you look at forecasts over the next 40 years to 2050, the gap between the developed world and the developing world is going to increase exponentially. The digital gap, we already know, is increasing. We're part of it, in a sense. Every few weeks, there's a new product offering, et cetera, but it's not thought of for anything other than developed world markets, not the developing markets. So gaps are increasing. There's also a cluster effect where poverty and failed states cost the world $279 billion a year. That's an Oxford University research that came out last year. That cost is borne by other poor countries. It's not borne by the rich countries. It's borne by other poor countries in the form of lost trade. So you have clusters of poverty, and we're here in Spain, in Europe, in historically the richest cluster of countries that there ever has been. But coincidentally, a few miles away from the coast of the cluster of the poorest countries there ever have been. So you get cases and situations like this, where people, there's an osmosis effect of people who want to simply participate. Hernando de Soto said that people specifically, it's not about rich and poor. Rich and poor basically want the same thing. They simply want to participate. So in closing, I'd say that we've got a great opportunity now, historical opportunities, to start to bring some of the developed world's devices and benefits to the developing world. It's a great opportunity. So I would imagine that anybody in this room that's been touched by a book, if you feel that you want to support us in terms of making perhaps the developed world a little smaller and the developing world a little larger. Thank you very much.